Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. We've got a passel of folks that are joining us online. So if you're joining us remotely, thanks for joining. And really excited to have you be a part of yet another event in the SEL WSU Celebration Collaboration Week. My name is Mary Rizak. I'm the Dean of the Boyland College of Engineering and Architecture. And many of the collaborations that happen between SEL and WSU in some way touch on the students, faculty, and staff within the Boylan College. And so we're really excited to be here today and to learn specifically today about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a really important topic for WSU. It's become much more important over the recent years. It grows in part out of computer science, and our computer science programs have been growing and expanding really exponentially. So over the last 5 years, enrollment in our undergraduate computer science courses around the system have doubled. We now have more than 1,000 students studying computer science with us. It has become the biggest undergraduate degree program in the college, bigger than mechanical engineering, but they're a very close second. Within the computer science space, over the past few years, in collaboration with SEL and others, we've learned that cybersecurity training for our undergraduate students is really a critically important element to allow them to be successful in their careers. So we've added required coursework in this topic at the undergraduate level, but we've now gone on to expand it not only for individual courses in cybersecurity for our students, but are looking now at certificate training in this topic. We were fortunate just a couple of months ago to get several $1 million in funding from the Department of Defense to provide training in this topic specifically for students who are in the ROTC and for students who might go on to be civilian employees within DoD. That project, as I was telling the panelists, Noel Schultz, who is the Edmund O. Schweitzer III Professor in Power Engineering, is a co-PI on that project, and she has leveraged resources from SEL to help develop that programming and develop the training for those students. So we're really excited about seeing that program develop over the next couple of years. Today, we're going to learn about the current state of events in cybersecurity from the SEL's perspective, and it's my pleasure to introduce the facilitator for this conversation, Frank Carroll. Frank is the Vice President for Security at Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories and has been so since 2016. He joined SEL after retiring from the FBI, a career to which he had devoted nearly 20 years in the investigation of sophisticated cyber attacks, terrorist attacks, and other federal crimes. I will note that Frank has shown me his ability to check things online just in the last 5 minutes, so today's not your day to make a mistake cyber-wise. But he joined SEL as the company's lead physical security officer and has really moved on now to accomplish a number of things in that role. Prior to joining SEL and prior to his career at the FBI, he served in the United States Navy for nearly 10 years as a carrier pilot and a jet fighter instructor. In 2011, Frank earned a master's degree in information technology with an emphasis on security and assurance from Carnegie Mellon University, and he has obtained a certified information systems security professional certification in 2004. I think we are quite fortunate to have Frank and the entire SEL team join us today and share their perspectives, and I thank you for joining us, and I look forward to the conversation. So. Turn it over to Frank.
Thank you, Dean Rizak, and I'm really honored to be here today. Number one, to celebrate our partnership with WSU, and also to introduce an extremely distinguished panel on, as the Dean mentioned, what really is the topic of our time today. For the first time this year, we've seen attacks on critical infrastructure that really brought home the threat that we face, and I'm referring specifically to the Colonial Pipeline attack, when Americans are up and down the east coast of the U.S. saw gas lines and increased prices, and that was really a demonstration of the threat faced, or that we face, from cyber physical threats that today have become legion, and it's something that we need a trained, continuing stream of professionals to combat. And it needs to enhance and imbue every profession. You can't just do this with cybersecurity professionals. So that's why this is such a timely topic, and one that I think we can talk to you about in some detail because of the role SEL plays. So let me level set. We have a lot of folks online about what SEL is, thanks to Dr. Schweitzer, and that's Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories. And SEL, since the early 80s, has specialized in creating digital devices. And I say digital because before the invention of SEL, or before SEL's invention of the digital relay, we were locked into electromechanical protection of the power system. And when you think about it, it's really something that really underpins the social fabric, and the very fact that we're here talking to each other physically in a room that's controlled by HVAC and power and connected digitally to dozens of folks. It's all thanks to the complex machinery that brings power to our homes, and that's something that SEL protects, automates, and controls around the world. Started here in Pullman, Washington, and Dr. Schweitzer invented that first digital relay, the microprocessor-based relay, in the SL21 in 1982, and it really revolutionized in ways that we don't fully understand, most of us, the electric power industry. And today, SEL technology is far broader than that, far broader. We even make ruggedized computers just a few, really less than a mile from where I'm standing there, as the crow flies. And we prevent blackouts, improve power quality, measure power quality, and really underpinning every electrical feeder distribution line, and even down to the household level. Those are SEL components largely in every North American utility, certainly as we sit here today. It's something you don't normally see. They're normally in cabinets, and it's really doing the work for decades under the surface, if you will, but it's really something that to think of that's happening right here on the Palouse. Every device that we make, every device that Dr. Schweitzer's invented is manufactured right here in the U.S., largely in Pullman, in Lewiston, Idaho, and a few other places around the country in the U.S., but that's really something to be proud of. It's a 100% employee-owned company, and that is something else that is, I think, noteworthy, and it draws heavily upon Washington State University. And you're going to hear that when I introduce these folks on stage here, really distinguished folks, and most of the folks on stage here went to school or taught, or both, at Washington State University and the surrounding region. Today, these products are in over 160 countries around the world, virtually in every country around the world. And again, that's right here from the Palouse. You can see it from where we stand here today, and that's something that I think that it really should be celebrated. I want to introduce the panel now, and I'll start from my right, your left, and that's Dr. Ed Schweitzer. He's the founder, president, and CTO, Chief Technology Officer of SEL. He's an IEEE, that's an electrical engineering organization that's world-renowned. He's a fellow there, and he's a member of the National Academy of Engineering. In 2019, he was inducted for what I just described into the National Inventors Hall of Fame for his invention of the first digital protective relay. It's a big deal. It's not something that most people know about, but again, it underpins everything that we do today is that technology. He's written dozens, scores of technical papers. In fact, we're going to give away 2 books that Dr. Schweitzer and Dave Whitehead co-authored with some other folks today. He holds more than 200 patents. Dr. Schweitzer earned his doctorate right here at WSU, where he also served on the electrical engineering faculty. He served in the Department of Defense and then founded SEL and became the inventor that I just described, and has grown into a company today that has over 5,400 employees, many of them Washington State University graduates. Next to Dr. Schweitzer is Dave Whitehead, who was the Chief Executive Officer of SEL. He's also a graduate of WSU. He's an electrical engineer and also a prolific inventor. Like Dr. Schweitzer, who has over 200 patents, Dave has been awarded more than 70 patents in the field of electrical engineering. He joined SEL in 1994, and he's currently recognized as a real leader in cybersecurity and electrical power innovation. He was called upon to provide expert testimony to the U.S. Senate, and he is regularly called upon to present at conferences around the world on the topic of cybersecurity, electrical power protection, and we're fortunate to have him. He joined SEL 25 years ago, and before that, he was a combat systems engineer for a major defense contractor. Next to Dave is Ryan Bradodich, who heads our Research and Development Division. He's a Senior Vice President, and he's been a part of SEL for well over 15 years. He's a principal investigator on several important Department of Energy projects, partnered with SEL, and he holds multiple patents. That's going to be a theme of everybody here on stage, except for me, including several related to security and communications. Prior to joining SEL, he worked on the security team of a major technology provider. Nick Seeley, seated next to Ryan, is the Senior Engineering Director for SEL's Infrastructure Defense Division. Much of what we do today is focused on cybersecurity, on securing the power systems that we protect from faults and preventing blackouts. But today, the adversarial threat is just as real, and Nick specializes with his team in doing just that. He heads a division of engineers, scientists, and support staff that do an array of security research, develop new products, and perform engineering services around the globe, not just here in the U.S. Nick also holds an array of power system-related patents and has written numerous papers dealing with the security, protection, automation, and control of very complex power systems. And finally, last but not least, Kylan Robinson is a Senior Engineering Manager here at SEL, and he earned his undergraduate and advanced computer engineering degrees, again, right here at WSU, and he's a recognized software engineering and security expert. And like everybody else up here, he holds numerous security-related patents. Kylan is also responsible for software security, and something else I'll mention. I'm speaking in terms of inventing and producing physical devices, but SEL is just as much a software development company as it is a hardware company, and security is riven through that. It has to be today because, again, attackers and adversaries, both financially motivated and state-sponsored, can reach out and touch us from a world away. Something that my parents, but your grandparents and great-grandparents never had to contemplate is an adversary, whether it's criminal or somebody else that has evil intent or espionage intent, can reach out into the U.S. from anywhere in the world, really at the speed of light. So we're going to be anxious to take your questions, but I'm going to start with a few for the panel to explore. And one of those, and I think it's important, and Dr. Schweitzer has seen the full arc of this, from the beginning of today of what we call the internet to the position we find ourselves in today, much of it good, some of it not so good. So, Dr. Schweitzer, can we trace the cybersecurity challenges we face today to the birth of what we call the internet? And let me put it another way. Why haven't communication technologies kept pace, and clearly they haven't, with the threat landscape we find ourselves in today?
Well, vulnerabilities of technology are always going to be exploited. If you think about it, they say that espionage is the second oldest profession. And you can decide what the first one is. So if you think about it, is this cat and mouse thing that goes on. When the telegraph was invented, pretty soon somebody figured out they could climb up a pole and clip a pair of high impedance headphones on there and intercept the traffic. And that carried over to the telephone and, well, ... all the way forward to the internet. Now what's so interesting about the internet is that it evolved without any contemplation of being cyber secure, without any contemplation of making it inherently evident who was talking to whom. And the things that really get it, and Frank, you already hit on it, is it's so fast. Everything connects to everybody, or it purports to do that. That's the one that advertised as such a huge thing is connectivity. And then the third thing is being able to do this at very low cost. So you're moving this information around at 6/10 of the speed of light and doing it where megabytes per pennies. It's not like a long time ago when a long distance transatlantic call was something that had to be scheduled, and in today's dollars might cost $50 or something. Now, speaking of moving information at 6/10 of the speed of light in our industry, we're the ones who get to move energy at the speed of light. So of course the information is usually going through fibers. And of course then the velocity of propagation in glass is about 0.6 of that in free space. Most electric power travels on air insulated transmission lines at the speed of light. So one thing I like to remind ourselves is that hey, that's our legacy, is we get to protect these electric power systems that are moving energy at the speed of light. So bottom line here is it's the speed, the connectivity, and the low cost that makes this super vulnerable. And in the beginning, nobody contemplated the needs for cybersecurity any more than the developers of the first telegraph communication systems or the telephone. And the last point here is that we need to be asking ourselves today a very fundamental question. And that's the other cool thing about universities, Dean Rizak, is that's where you and students have and faculty have that opportunity. And the question is, what is inherently safe cyber?
Thank you, Dr. Schweitzer. And it's going to be interesting if we continue to accept the level of quality we get, I think, from technology vendors, something that at SEL we take to heart, and that is, are we going to be forever okay with Patch Tuesdays, with being beta testers for software that is, some vulnerabilities are unavoidable, mistakes will happen, constant testing needs to happen, but we all have to, I think, step back and reevaluate the state of affairs, and is that the way we want to exist in perpetuity? And Dave, you know, something else I'll mention about SEL devices and operational technology, I want to introduce that topic, the difference in IT, information technology, and OT, operational technology. SEL devices live like all protective relays and devices used in industrial settings, may operate for decades and need to operate in a failure resistant or failure proof way for many years. So Dave, would you help us understand the difference between operational technology and how that differs from information technology in this context?
Sure, I'd be happy. Everybody can hear me? Good. Okay, we could spend a lot of time talking about IT and OT and all their differences, but succinctly, the way I like to think about it is IT systems are, and they consist of both hardware and software, really designed and set up for moving digital information. And that information could be, I want to send an email to my mom, I need to do some banking, maybe I want to watch Netflix, or those kind of activities. And really, it is about the information itself. There's probably not some time criticality of if my mom gets my email a minute from now or 2 minutes from now, it's probably not going to matter too much. Do the flip side for the OT systems, the operational technologies, that's really about moving information to control physical things. So we could talk about a valve, a sensor on a valve that I need to measure. Maybe I want to open and close it. Maybe it's the heating system in our building. So being able to connect sensors together, make control decisions, and send commands back out into the system. And the difference then between that is these are control systems. We all remember from control system classes, time is really important, right? Especially if it's a digital system. We talk about bringing data in, processing in a certain amount of time, and making a control decision to affect change on whatever it is we're measuring or trying to monitor and control. And those are really the two big separations. The IT systems, they're dynamic. We probably all walked in here with a smartphone, and there's probably a WSU network I can get on where I can, send an email to my mom right now, I guess, or if we're really boring, you guys can go watch Netflix or something like that. And the OT system on the flip side then, again, it is really a control-based system designed to do one thing. It's not having a bunch of sensors show up one day and then move on to the next day. Purpose-built, deterministic OT systems, IT systems dynamic with a lot of variability in them. Does that help, Frank?
It does. And again, I'll note that failure is really not an option in operational technology, and these systems have to be resilient, fast, and again, operate without error. And in many times, fixing a vulnerability for instance, an SEL device, it may be 40 feet on a steel power pole in a cabinet, requiring somebody to physically visit it in a ladder truck to update. So that's why my next question is.
Oh, wait, I got to comment on that, sending a firmware upgrade to an SEL device. My boss sitting next to the right of me reminds us all the time that when we release a product, it's like a moonshot. You don't get to pull this thing back, right? We have to make sure our software is cyber secure so that we're not trying to send. We don't believe in Patch Tuesday or whatever the term is, right? We don't have critical infrastructure. You don't get to take a time out to go, let's shut down the power system for a while while we do Patch Tuesday, or the smiley face, and I'll be back with you in 10 or 15 minutes. You know, this may take some time when you're doing your Windows upgrade. In OT systems, you don't have that luxury.
Our stuff is like a rivet in a bridge. It's installed, and you expect it to do its job for a century. And nobody's going around doing patch 2 on bridge rivets, are they?
And you can see why in the early 80s that was such a big leap to go from electromechanical devices to digital devices with that level of reliability, and SEL did it.
Yeah, and Frank, I would also add, think about it this way, since we're talking about it. What's the first thing that people normally do? You know, you call up your IT help desk or whatever, and like you've got a problem with your computer. What's the first thing that you do? Like, it might be inherent. Somebody might tell you to do it. It's
Saturday Night
yeah,
Live,
turn it off, turn it back on
yeah,
again.
yeah.
Can you imagine us telling, like, can you shut your generator off? Like, go ahead and turn it off and then turn it back on again. It's like, that's exactly why, right? We can't afford to have Patch Tuesday, stuff like that, where people kind of beta test their own.
Yeah, try to imagine that our customers take protective relays out, they install them into their critical infrastructure. They're monitoring generators, transmission lines, distribution systems, and photovoltaics and wind farms and everything in between it. And you turn it, you put it in service, you turn it on, and it needs to stay on and operate perfectly, flawlessly for 30 years. And if it ever goofs up and makes a mistake, mistakes are really bad. If you want to see what a mistake in our industry looks like, close your eyes tight. You know, it kind of looks black, see, when the power goes off. So we cannot false trip a circuit breaker. On the other hand, there's no way that we can miss a fault either and let it burn on a transmission line or inside a transformer. This is really serious business.
Yeah, also note too that we always think of electricity generally in consumer terms, and that's important enough. Clearly, it's important to each and every one of us. But SEL devices protect, for instance, Walter Reed Army Hospital, Pullman Regional Hospital, the COVID-19 vaccine production lines at Pfizer. So these are also used in industrial settings that are hypercritical, and again, they're no fail. And again, a lot of that is being, or all of that really is being done right here in the U.S. Much of it right across the prairie here, just less than a mile away, and a lot of it by WSU graduates, and we're hiring more all the time. So we've talked about that arc of cybersecurity threat, and so Ryan spends a lot of time worrying about protecting against and girding against that threat. So Ryan, how does SEL address cybersecurity from a product and service perspective? That's an open question, but how has that changed, and how do you see cybersecurity in terms of our products and services?
So a lot of it is like Ed instilled from the very beginning in our culture, cybersecurity. So cybersecurity a lot begins at the people we hire. It's with our supply chain. So we spend a lot of time working and partnering with our supply chain so we know where all of our parts come from. We're constantly aware of the evolving threats and the different activities that are going on in our industry. And as Frank and Ed talked earlier, it's that cat and mouse game. Every time we become a little bit more connected, we add more attack surface. So how are we constantly providing safeguards against that attack surface? So we've been very involved since the very beginning. When we first put our first relays out there, they had 2 levels of passwords, one for read-only access and then another one that would be able to change it. And then even when you went to that second level of access, it clicked an alarm contact so somebody at the operations center would know that someone would have access to be able to change it. And that philosophy's been in our culture from SEL all the way through. We're doing the same thing now with our communications. Communications is the pathway generally for the cybersecurity. So we're redefining how Ethernet works using software-defined networking. And we're really looking at, instead of allowing everything talk to everything, how do you only allow the authorized devices talking to authorized devices using authorized protocols, and then deny everything else? So it changes the way the network works, but it is basically engineering your communications along with your protection application. And someday that will be a cat and mouse, and we got to keep vigilant and make sure that we continue to move forward on our cyber defense and always try to stay ahead of the attackers. The services is done the same way that we look at the product. So at the product, we look at the whole thing. What are all the ways that it could be misused? The services, when they put the products into service, they look at the entire picture of the application. What are all the ways it could be in? What are my safeguards? How do I have my defense in depth? Have I done least privilege all the way through? Is everything patched to the latest one? Do I have the latest firmware? And what's the maintenance cycle for it, so that we know that it's continuously maintained and updated? So that's really how we look at it holistically.
I've got a great example of the philosophy or culture of cybersecurity. I can remember we were over in Ed's office one time, and we have a wide area network system called ICON. And Ed got all our security people, and then we went through every single port, all the software, what are all the different ways a bad guy might think about abusing this device or taking advantage of it. And we came out with a great list of it, right? And it was more of a, not wait, let's see what happens, rather a proactive approach to cybersecurity, taking the idea that somebody is going to try to do something, mischievous to our device, and what are all the ways that we can mitigate these things. And what you really quickly come and find out with, there's no silver bullet, there's no one thing, rather it has to be a layered defense, because somebody's going to break through layer 1, so what are all the 2, 3, and 4 you have to do? So that's the culture that really had set up from ever since I've been at the company 27 years ago.
So we were all black hats that day. And not just the Ethernet ports, the serial ports, the IRB timecode port, the power supply port, every hole in that product we looked at to see if we wanted to attack our own product, how would we have at it? And we did. We came up with a good list, made some improvements, and it's all that more robust of a solution. It's also, that particular product is TDM, Time Domain Multiplex System. And in those systems, nobody talks to anybody until you put in the rules. And Dr. Bradetich's systems now, that he mentioned, the SEL Software Defined Network, takes that same approach of nobody talking to anybody until the rules are put into place. He takes that into the Ethernet world.
And I mentioned services, and Dr. Bradetich, Ryan did a great job of describing how we secure them, but I also mentioned that I talked about innovating, inventing, manufacturing devices and software, but we also have a services team comprising hundreds of individuals, many of them WSU graduates as well, that from the tip of South Africa to the Arctic, to a helicopter to oil rigs, commission these devices and design and install systems of these devices to protect power systems and industrial operations around the globe. So that's also something, again, the locus of that activity is right here, just a few, within walking distance where we sit today. And Dr. Schweitzer and Nick will also spend a lot of time in this area, but I do want to ask you this. The government has an important role here, but what is the appropriate role of the government, in your opinion, in securing cyberspace today?
This is something we've thought about for a long time, and I had the honor of being a part of a White House briefing many years ago, and President Obama and a lot of the cabinet members attended it, and at that time, the story I presented is the same one I'll do today, is that's the government's role is to teach the threat with all due respect for the sources and methods that our government does use through its three-letter agencies to keep us safe, and to do so in near real time. The parallel to that might be the National Weather Service. So there's tons of sensors out there operated by government and private industry to figure out what the weather is doing. And this information is packaged in different ways in real time to make it suitable for showing up on, whether underground or aviation flight services or agricultural applications, hurricane prediction services. And all of these then are packaged and made available to you and me within mere moments after the data are collected. So that's number one, teach the threat with all due respect for sources and methods in real time. That's a big hurdle for the government to do because, that's a different way of looking at the processing of information. The closest historical perspective I could ever think about that was when the Soviet Union was building up its military presence on the island nation of Cuba, and that we were collecting information by overflights by several different kinds of aircraft. And they would fly over, take pictures, land in Florida, and pop the film out of the airplanes, and they were developed at the National Photographic Interpretation Center and plopped on President Kennedy's desk. And then a very, very difficult, serious decision. He instantaneously declassified those and appeared on television explaining to we the people this threat from less than 90 miles away. The second thing that the government needs to do is to share its ideas for best practices. Share its ideas for best practices. Those are the two. Teach the threat with all due respect for sources and methods, and share its ideas for best practices. Now, in the same way that teaching the threat is sort of counter-intuitive to intelligence services that like to hold everything close to protect their sources and methods, sharing ideas for best practices is sort of counterintuitive to the regulation nation of today. Our friends in the elected officials whom we send to Washington, D.C., especially to the legislative branch, believe their jobs are to write laws. And laws usually result in regulations. They don't have to. The legislative process can encourage the sharing of ideas for best practice as opposed to regulating. Why am I so adamant about the difference between regulating and sharing? It's because once you start regulating, people turn into a compliance mindset. And in that compliance mindset, you say, okay, comply, 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 I'm done. And you can comply and still be vulnerable because, let's face it, the bad guys move faster than Congress by, how many? One is moving at the speed of a snail, and the other one is the bad guys are moving at the speed of light.
Thank you, Dr. Schweitzer. And, I do see enhanced response from the government. I think we probably all do, Nick. I think you might agree with me there, that we and I'm sure WSU, from a defense perspective, sees an increasingly rapid intelligence feed from the government.
I can't wait till there's an app on your and my phone that we can open up that makes good sense of what the attacks are, so that it's, intelligence that you can act on, whether you're a dean of a college or running a highly mechanized automated farm on the Palouse or running a hospital. That's what I want.
So there's a lot of the most recent, I don't know if it's the most recent executive order, but 14028, right, was securing the nation's critical infrastructure. That focused a lot on public-private partnership and data sharing. So it's certainly in all of our benefit to look at that and share, like Dr. Schweitzer said, without regulating, but being able to share so we don't become a compliance, because that's unfortunately, a lot of times what happens in cybersecurity is it's just a checkbox just to comply.
Exactly.
And then sharing is a two-way street. We all have our friends in the government ask us for stuff, and of course, we're encouraging them to share back, because sharing is caring.
Kylan, from your optic, and again, you spend a lot of time on software security and the threats surrounding that. What cybersecurity threats concern you the most from your perspective?
Yeah, so working in R&D, my team and I produce a number of both physical and software-based products. And I'm glad you talked about the ICON negative testing and threat modeling is what we call it, that we've done. And that's actually part of our standard development process. And so that's not just a one-off thing. We do that for every product that we produce. And we consider all sorts of threats when we go through that. The standard ones that you might think of: nation-state actors, well-funded groups, individuals with malicious intent. And then some others that you might not consider as often, insider threats, folks that are inside the organization and trusted. What can we do to control their span of control and prevent them from doing anything malicious? But it's not always malicious either. There can be insiders in the organization that simply make a mistake. Those are also threats to cybersecurity that we consider in our threat modeling. I think probably the biggest threat that I see to OT networks in particular is just a lack of situational awareness. We talked about the openness of the internet and of Ethernet networks, and Vince Cerf and his colleagues, when they were setting this all up, they were just excited that it worked, right? They didn't really think about cybersecurity, and a lot of end user customers today feel the same way about their networks. They're just glad that they work. They don't really understand exactly what traffic is passing on their network or how they're set up. So they really lack a degree of situational awareness that they need in order to maintain good cybersecurity. And that's why I'm excited about some of the products and technologies that we're able to produce, because they really do take a deny by default approach. They really take an engineered approach, saying define what you want, what communications you want to exist on this network, and we'll ensure that no other communications pass.
I'll take it just a step further. I think one other thing that we also work within in cybersecurity is there's a common held belief that if you're adding security, it's going to make it more difficult. It's going to be more inconvenient. And I think especially on the OT side, where everything is purpose-built, we really have the opportunity to leapfrog because we can design the security in, and it should allow everybody to do what they need to do easily as part of their job description. And if they aren't allowed, either through intentional or accidental use, at that point is when the cybersecurity comes in. It's a tricky challenge and always something we're striving to do, but how do we make it so the products and services are easier to use when they're cyber secure than they are when they're not?
That's excellent. Nick, and I'm sure Dave and Ed will have an opinion here too, but how concerned, Ryan and Kylan just referred to nation-state adversaries. How concerned should we be? How sophisticated is this threat really? And what is the level of concern that all of us should apply with regard to what we term nation-state adversaries?
Very.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of really scary stories out there about cyber threats. Hopefully everybody updated their iPhone to 14.8, right? The release came out yesterday. That was some pretty nasty stuff. You didn't even have to click on anything and your phone could be infected and taken control of. That's how the degree to which people can compromise devices. And that was as reported, being used by nation states. You can't look at a website or anything like that without reading, okay, Colonial Pipeline, you've got the solar winds, you've got all of these things that were, allegedly done by nation states or under the auspices of essentially a nation state. So there's all of that to be very, very concerned about. But then beyond the technical threat, I think, is one of the other interesting things that we don't even know the ramifications of are not just stealing your password or blacking out something, but what are the social media implications of people taking control of, putting, there's a big, fake news or kind of trying to influence policy or elections. And we know that's happening, right? That's being reported on. We don't know exactly, if somebody has an app like, we were talking internally, TikTok, right? Who knows what's there? Like the Chinese government won't even allow their own citizens to use TikTok, yet somehow it's going to be safe for us. And that should be concerning for people, right? Because we don't know exactly what the outcome of that is going to be. It's probably going to be a decade or more before we actually see it, and by then it might be too late. So not to be completely doom and gloom, but there's a lot to be concerned about.
I'll just follow on a little bit what Nick said. I'm not going to go into the TikTok side, or I'll stick with the OT side. Is that yeah, you should be concerned about it, but that doesn't mean you get paralyzed and we don't do something about it. I look at cyber as yet another aspect of what we put into our particular product. Yeah, we've got great things for protecting the power system. We have communication protocols, and oh yeah, there needs to be a security aspect. It's just another engineering problem that we need to address and take care of. And is it a big problem? Sure it is, right? There's a lot of different attack vectors that somebody might want to come and take advantage of a particular product, but it's no reason to hide or be afraid. It's just I love being an engineer. I love solving problems. We put in layers of defense to take care of these things. We're smart about designing power systems. It's a great time to be in the cybersecurity business.
So Dave gives this very calm outlook. That's why he's the CEO, see. So I share that. And I also really want to underscore what Nick is talking about. You look at the stuff that appeared in the Wall Street Journal, for example, the last few days about Facebook and Instagram. And we've already mentioned TikTok. That's also been in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere. And I was thinking back when, believe me, it was before I was born, when the use of cocaine in the United States was legal. And everybody knows the story about it being the most active ingredient in Coca-Cola before caffeine and sugar. And there's even reports that Thomas Alva Edison liked to dissolve a little cocaine in his red wine. I'm not sure that's true, but I have read that. And so then I want to compare that to social media today. It is so psychologically addictive, and that it's so difficult on young folks in our societies. So when you see something this potent, we must immediately assume that there are nation states with evil intent towards our country via its youth, unfortunately, to misuse these. Now, coming back to the critical infrastructure and the operational technology for a moment, Dave and I both like to stand up and say, we're not going to stand up to do it today, we're so comfy here, thank you, is never connect critical infrastructure to the internet, audit this. That's how bad it is. Don't do it. An electric power utility operating a system of sources of energy and substations and the intermediate transmission and distribution systems needs to provide its own secure communications via optical fiber, via pilot wires, via secure point-to-point radio communications. It must do that. And the idea of depending on the internet for the control of an electric power system or other critical infrastructure is just plain asking for trouble.
I'd also like to kind of following off of what Dave said, just so that the Mr. Sunshine up here doesn't seem quite so gloomy. It is.
Nick's got a new name now at work.
I just gave myself a nickname. All right. It is really important to understand like how good of a time it is to be in cybersecurity at this point, right? There's so much that we don't know about cybersecurity, and like what Dr. Schweitzer was talking about, there are no first principles of cybersecurity, right? That's one thing that we talk about internally. Like there's just no fundamentals by which we can understand how to design something securely. We've got some rules of thumb, right? And we have some things that we think work fairly well. But I really encourage, since we're at a university, we've got students, we've got professors, we've got faculty, like that's the big question that is outstanding. Dr. Schweitzer said at the very beginning of the kind of like the emergence of the internet, it wasn't designed with security in mind, and that's very true. You can go back to some of the very early papers like the Rand report or the Anderson report back from the mid-60s. That was what they were trying to do, was trying to look at, oh wait, we have all this software now and we're going to use it in the Department of Defense. We better figure out a way to secure it. And what they were trying to secure was confidentiality. They were trying to figure out how to encrypt the information, not to try to get people so that they couldn't infiltrate that. And that was in the mid-60s. We still haven't come that much farther. We've made some progress, but it's not for lack of trying. I think it just goes to show how monumentally hard the problem actually is, and we need all the help that we can get, and that's great for
the problem gets bigger every day because the speeds are faster, the costs are lower, and the connectivity is greater. And you're right, Nick. This is a great time to be working in cybersecurity. In fact, I'm going to pose it this way because we are at a university. Students, faculty, leadership involved in cybersecurity. Do you want to put just another layer on the onion, or do you want to really go out and fix the problem? Professor Bob Olson's here in the audience, and he and I had a colleague, Dick Baker, and Professor Baker loved to say, let's always go back to first principles and start from there. So what are those first principles that we should begin with in contemplating inherently safe cyber? I think that's a real good way for university to look at it, and probably the source of 10 PhD topics.
What's our cyber F equals MA or Maxwell's equations?
Oh, you can't push on a rope.
Well, that's what we need for cyber.
One thing I wanted to circle back on, just what you talked about with social media, Dr. Schweitzer. It just he was referring to what is very interesting from the Wall Street Journal. Sounds stodgy publication, but they've done a really recent week and a half or so. Have done a really interesting multi-part investigative reporting job on social media, the fact that social media companies understand what's happening with the product, and some of the really negative effects it's having, especially on youth, young women, et cetera. It's really interesting read if you're not aware of that.
You know what that reminds me of? Reminds me of smoking.
Yeah.
Say in the late mid-40s, 50s, big tobacco like to make it look like it was a good thing to do for social and health reasons, and of course it's emphysema, lung cancer, heart disease, and frankly it stinks.
You even had doctors promoting it for pay when they knew that was not.
And doctors would smoke.
Yeah. Something that I think we've all not missed in our daily lives, maybe we've been impacted by it personally, but it's definitely more than that's the ransomware threat. And so it used to be, simple, almost annoying encryption demand for ransom, which was sort of randomly sent. Today it's much different. It's a multifaceted extortion threat. So I wanted to pose a question to Ryan and Kylan, essentially because it's not yet really impacted the OT world before the Colonial Pipeline, but it certainly has now, even though you can make that distinction. If it shuts down an oil pipeline, that's an operational technology impact, regardless of where it stopped in the stack. So how has that disruptive impact of ransomware, recent attacks, how has it changed your view of the state of cybersecurity?
It really hasn't changed mine at all. Before the Colonial Pipeline, we had attacks in Ukraine. We've had attacks all over the world from nation states on it. The attacks and the threats were always there. I think probably the thing that is different is the motivation. So with the ransomware, the motivation is now money versus crippling a state or inducing fear into that population. So it's probably the motivation, but the fundamentals of how to design the system, how to secure the system, all those things need to be the same. With the Colonial Pipeline, the ransomware attack came in through the IT side on that. So it is, once again, going back to what Dave and Ed say, make sure that you are not connecting your critical infrastructure to the internet and audit it. And that's some of those first principles and things that we need to keep in mind. And it's really looking at the overall attack threat and the attack surface. How much do you want, how much attack surface do you want for your critical infrastructure? Are you getting the value you want out of every risk that you're taking? So in a way, it's just the same old engineering problems we solve every day. What is the risk trade-off for the value you're going to get out of that risk?
Yeah, and I would agree with Ryan. And what really changed was that before ransomware, there were a limited number of motivations for hacking a system. And OT systems in particular were not that attractive because there's not a lot of information to steal or sell, and there's not a lot of fame to be gained from getting into a system. But now, with ransomware, there's a business model and there's a cottage industry, and these critical systems that we depend on for our daily lives, if they can be shut down or held ransom, they are extremely valuable. So I think the profile for a hacker has been raised on the OT side quite a bit. And our target is bigger than it's been before.
So I want to leave just a few minutes to be able to address any questions from the audience, either physically or virtually. But I'll close with my questions by asking the panel in no particular order, what do you consider some of the more important things that individuals can do to remain cyber secure? Dr. Schweitzer.
Minimize social media. And we've already talked about never connecting critical infrastructure to the internet and to audit this. I'll stop with 2.
I'll have maybe it's similar to that, but just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it, right? To Ryan's point is evaluate the cost benefit to whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I'd say use unique passwords. Never reuse a password. Password managers can help you with that, and they're excellent tools for personal security.
I think a lot of what I think with cybersecurity is just awareness. I think we like to give up a lot of information for some value that we perceive of it, and always be thinking about what is that information I'm giving up and how could that be used. It may start off as very well intended, but once that information's out there, you don't get it back. So I think it's just a conscious, what am I giving up, and does it make sense for the value of what I'm getting out of it?
Yeah, I would say largely we're probably maybe preaching to the choir, because if you're here, you're a cybersecurity, and you already know don't click links that you shouldn't do. You know, people are not just going to email you to give you money, right? And it's like all that kind of stuff. We already know that. One of the things that I would say, since we're kind of in that light of we know some of the basics to do, is I would encourage people to teach other people, like, and not be condescending about it, right? It's very easy to not understand how difficult it is for certain people to grasp just basic concepts of internet and technology. So just be willing to teach, be willing to tell people, like, no, it's not a good idea to go to that website, I'm going to steal your information.com, right? I mean, it's just like basic stuff like that. Don't, use HTTPS, right? And don't give your credit card information over a site that doesn't have that. And even some of the, that may not even be enough, right? And I mean, there's just some things like that. Please reach out and kind of help educate people in a way that they can understand, in a way that they feel comfortable learning and asking questions about.
And then to protect your family, especially children, and insist that our schools do this too, to make sure that the psychological impacts of these social media are not damaging the youth of our nation.
Yeah, cyber literacy is something that I think we all agree needs to start earlier and be reinforced often. And I'll add one more thing to that, and again, I think we're probably speaking to an audience that already knows this, but if you access any system in your personal and professional lives, and it is shocking actually, we deal with hundreds of suppliers, maybe thousands. If you access any system that you can authenticate to with only a user ID and a password, without some other token, without some other attribute, then you need to rethink that. Whether that's an Amazon account or your bank account, et cetera, it's basically multi-factor authentication. It is absolutely imperative today, and if you haven't done that, I would encourage anybody online or anyone else to take the time tonight and fix that, because ultimately that will lead to a compromise. And we see it day in and day out and help people that come into that. So with that, love to answer any questions someone may have. You know, probably the better way to do it, if we could, and I can actually be a mic runner, but or if just so the folks online can hear it, the microphone might be a better option to vocalize a question, or I can repeat it too.
Is it on? Yeah. Thank you. Great, very interesting presentation, discussion. You know, you brought up the Apple iPhone recent upgrade, or software upgrade. But so trust with me and a company, say Apple, for example, why wasn't that communicated in near time, in real time? Like you said, Ed, the threat there, I mean, I heard about it from a friend, right? That's not right. I should have been notified directly from Apple it's time to upgrade. So how do we develop trust with companies that we work with or interact with?
These power tools deserve deeper understanding by all of us when we're using them, and that there are these relationships between, say, you and the supplier of your telephone, and that is a individual to business relationship, and that I believe that the manufacturer and the consumer have a mutual opportunity and responsibility that should be better addressed. I am generally dissatisfied with the big push that everything should connect to everything, and never mind this stuff, and we'll put more one layer onto it instead of really fixing the onion. We're going to just add another layer onto it. That's not okay. And the slow response, the response times are actually pretty good. I think I read about it one day. Maybe I was behind a couple days in reading, and then I noticed that night my telephone was updated when I woke up or I noticed it the next morning that it was.
Yeah, and I think too, it highlights another point, and it's a great one. We don't have time to fully explore it, but it is the rise of basically mercenary talent, which was the case here by the NGO group in this particular case, but groups that can weaponize exploits like that, sell them to governments and also to non-government entities, and then use them in a way that really we all need to be worried about from a civil liberty perspective. And so that is a vexing problem, and one that we'll have to confront.
Well, do you remember Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, about the Chevrolet Corvair? So his book was entitled Unsafe at Any Speed. That's a good lesson, I think, to share. I'd like to use that expression all the time to describe the current state of information technology. It's unsafe at any speed.
Hey, go to your settings, general software updates, and turn on automatic updates, and that'll take care of it for you. And you didn't get the notification?
Yes, because it requires a Wi-Fi. So if you're traveling or moving around or what, it can be spotty. I agree with you. There needs to be better notification, and even if the phone can't do it because of its current state in terms of Wi-Fi connection, it could notify you that you need to move to one to make that happen.
I would also say, though, that there's an interesting broader context of, you mentioned the word trust, and I think that is enormous in cybersecurity. As much as we want to believe that we don't trust anything, right, and we'll figure it out, like we'll verify and validate things. There's a whole movement in the IT side of the realm, which is making its way over to the OT side of thing, a philosophy called zero trust. But the premise, though, I would say, is that at some point you have to trust things. It's just a matter of what are you going to trust, and why are you going to trust that. So I think that's going to be a broader conversation that we're going to have kind of as a community and a society, of like, where does that trust lie, and why am I trusting Apple, and like how many times can you put your trust in a corporation or something like that and it be violated and you still, you know, extend that trust to people. That is a very deep conversation, and it's going to involve a lot more than just, you know, electrical and cybersecurity engineers. Like, there's philosophers and sociologists and all this. Like, that is a huge spectrum, but I think the faster we have that conversation and the more deeply we have that conversation, the better off we're going to be.
And that relates, say, to product liability, whether it's say a COVID vaccine, which is a government approval process, or somebody making a lawnmower. There's tons of product liability. And frankly, I don't see a whole hell of a lot of it in the software application, hardware businesses of the involving information technology. And in fact, none of us even bothers to read all the disclaimers that are pages long in font suitable for people whose eyeballs are less than 30 years old. We don't read it. And besides, it just says that they don't, you know, it doesn't, you don't have any rights and they don't have any responsibility. And I think that needs to change.
We might have a question.
Yeah, real quick, I wanted to follow up on the statement about policy and checking the boxes. And, you know, since, you know, I did my dissertation 15 years ago, the user's always been the weakest link, the individual. But yet, a lot of the security policies and the things we look at to get people to do things is based on the idea of compliance, that I'm told these things I need to do, and I check the boxes and I do the things. How do we have to rethink that in order to get people more responsible? And I think they'll always be the weakest link, but maybe we can make that link a little bit stronger.
Think about, what's the theater over there in Moscow, Idaho, Adina? Yeah, the Kenworthy Movie Theater over there in Moscow, Idaho. Walk in there, and behind the popcorn counter, there's a slate switchboard that used to be the switchboard for the lighting. And those were called live front switchboards because all the electrical knife, you know, the Frankenstein knife switches were live. So, and of course, with a live front switchboard, if you touched it, you were dead. And then later, now in today's switchboards, we don't even call them that, but they're dead front, which means you're alive. So people learned in the electrical industry over 100 years to make things that are safe. There's standards about how big of a hole you can put in an electrical product, and the size of that hole is smaller than anybody's finger, for example, or even a pen or a pencil, to keep people safe. And this is the way that, out of necessity, the cyber world will change. And this gives tremendous opportunities for universities like Washington State University and its students and faculty, and companies like us to move forward in a cyber, you know, an inherently cyber safe world.
If I could say, and I think the success of Dr. Schweitzer and Schweitzer Engineering has been challenging the normal and never accepting what appeared to be as good as it can get. And I think that's where cybersecurity has to go, is not to accept patch Tuesdays, not to accept critical vulnerabilities that lie in wait for years or are concealed, or whatever the case may be. And I think we can get there. We've shown it with human ingenuity. We just have to understand that it's possible and continue to probe that outer boundary and make it better.
I'll talk a little bit about the compliance piece. I think a lot of the reason why we don't like the compliance, because we want people to think about the security. But I think when you're actually trying to measure something, did somebody do something, it's very hard to measure security because it's still nebulous, undefined. We don't have those first principles. We don't have a system that's inherently cyber safe that way. So the closest we can start to drive to that is, what are a few good things that I can do, and that comes into compliance. I think a lot of the problem is that that's where we stop. I think the compliance could be a good, hey, this is a checklist. I know I should do all these things before I do it, but I should also be aware. If you look at linemen, you look at our industry, one of the very first things they do before they get on a job site is have a safety briefing. Let's look around the job site. What are all the things that can hurt me? What are all the things that we should be doing? And they're always going beyond the checklist and understanding what their site doing on site and making sure that they're safe. I think if we get into that mentality, then we'll be able to get past, I'm done with compliance, and use it as this is a guideline to make sure that I at least have a minimum level, and then I can get those out of the way so that I could keep looking for how to advance security.
You know, in the interest of your time, we could go on for, or I could at least. I'm sure the panel, we're pretty passionate about this topic for hours, but that brings it. We've gone a little bit over, so we should probably stop here. And thank you for your time and attention, those of you here and for those of you online. We would love to answer any questions. We would love to entertain any questions you have later about anything, including employment. And we're grateful to have had your ear for the time we've had. Oh, and so let me read two names for the Sensible Cybersecurity books at the front, and that's Ajibe Oyuwamafimi and Arumala Josiah Seri Adams. If you would, on the way out, you can pick up those books co-authored by Dave Whitehead, Dr. Schweitzer, and then and a couple other gentlemen that are here today. We're thankful for your time.